We want to welcome everyone for taking time to join us today. Thank you for coming to another installment of On Course with Liberal Arts. Today's topic is creative endeavors and expressions of the Black diaspora, focusing on one of our campus jewels, which is the art galleries at Black Studies. It's my honor to introduce our speakers, Kendall Gross and Dr. Jennifer Wilkes. Kendall holds a BA from Emory University and an MA in art history from the University of Texas at Austin. Her public education experience includes researching and preparing lectures for a range of audiences, from K through 12 to university groups to museum volunteers. As the Education and Visitor Services Coordinator for the Art Galleries at Black Studies, she works to connect audiences with Black Studies' growing art and archival collection through engaging public programs and content creation. Dr. Jennifer Wilkes is an Associate Professor of English and African Diaspora Studies at the University of Texas, where she also directs the John L. Warfield Center for African and African American Studies. Her research interests include adaptations of Carmen set in African diasporic contexts and representations of race and apocalypse in contemporary US and European culture. She's also an award-winning teacher and an inaugural member of the Texas 10, which is the Texas X's annual recognition of the top UT Austin professors. We hope you'll please send your questions via the chat function, and we'll answer as many as possible in the last part of the webinar. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kendall and Dr. Wilkes.
Hi, thank you everyone for joining us. We're so excited to be here, myself and Dr. Wilkes, to speak about Black creative expression, especially as it's seen through the collecting units of Black Studies. And so with that, actually, let me jump right in. As Justin introduced, my name is Kendall Gross, and I'm the Education and Visitor Services for the Art Galleries at Black Studies. And today we will be looking at what makes us unique among COLA, right? The fact that we are a collecting unit and that we are actively seeking to think about Black creative expression, identity, narratives, and history through, of course, cultural, artistic, and archival material. And so when we are saying, for the culture, we really are placing culture at the forefront of our mission at Black Studies. And I hope that together we'll be able to look at some of this artwork and see what really makes it pop, and also look at some of the exhibitions that we currently have on view in the galleries. And so once again, just jumping right into things, I always like to joke that the Art Galleries of Black Studies, we are a bit of the new kid on the block. We actually just opened our doors in 2016, and really moving from, in the beginning, exhibiting artwork, featuring artwork in conference room spaces, to then featuring artwork in these wonderful and intimate gallery spaces. And one of our gallery spaces in particular that we see on the screen, this is the Christian Green Gallery. And then we also have the Idea Lab. And the Christian Green Gallery is situated in Justice Center, a very intimate space that really grew out of the Warfield Center and its sort of mission in collecting practices. And then we also have the Idea Lab space, which is located in the Gordon White building, which is the home of Black and Latino studies on campus. And so during her tenure, in fact, as the Warfield Center director, Dr. Cherie Smith was really aiming to grow and expand upon the department's collecting practices, and I really do urge people to think, what does it mean for a department, an academic department, to really place emphasis upon collecting art? What does it mean for students to not only interact with just, professors and other students, library resources on campus, but to also think about artwork in Jester, artwork in the Gordon White building also as a source of inspiration or source of learning, and really also grappling with ideas of Black identity beyond even just a page, but to think about grappling with Black identity through material culture. And on the screen here, we also have the Idea Lab, and we have our current exhibition featuring artist Adrian Armstrong titled With New Eyes. And to the left, we actually see the artist himself, and then to the right, we see the curator of the exhibition, Philip Townsend. And the art galleries of Black Studies, right? So we have the Christian Green Gallery, and then we also have the Idea Lab space. And thinking about how these galleries really grew out of, Dr. Cherie Smith's turn as a Warfield Center director. She then became, once the galleries were founded and opened their doors in 2016, the executive director of the galleries. Really thinking about how can, once again, these galleries really serve as platforms from which to think about the creative expression of the Black diaspora. And I would say that that is truly at the heart of what we do at the Art Galleries of Black Studies, really thinking about how we can reach students both on university campus, but also out in the wider Austin community. How can we really make our art collection sort of pop to audiences and really think about, well, how can we tell these very multifaceted, how can we tell these very engaging stories through artwork? And especially in my role, I am the one sort of leading people around and saying, hey, this artwork really is here for you to think about what's happening in your classrooms, what's happening day to day. I can't tell you how many times, even as, the education coordinator, but also just as a person in the world, I'm thinking, oh yeah, this moment that we're having right now, I'm really thinking about, for example, March On, an exhibition that we featured once about the life of John Lewis and the sort of continuous struggle of the civil rights movement, right? We know that the civil rights movement and all of its struggles didn't just end during that time period. This is a struggle that continues. And it's very eye-opening for students to think about, hey, this is a struggle for liberation, for representation that existed in the 60s and 70s, and it continues to exist today. And so I love this image in particular because what we're looking at is an example of an old exhibition that we've had. So with the Art Galleries of Black Studies, once again, thinking about a very wide representation of Black creative expression, we are thinking about Black identity as it exists on a global scale. And so with this exhibition in particular, this was dedicated to the modern American artist, Charles White. And one thing that I always love to ask people, and feel free to think about this in your mind. I'm not going to quiz anybody on this Zoom. You didn't come for like that sort of lecture, right? But nonetheless, when we think about artists who we are very familiar with, when we think about artists who we are expected to know, right? I think people often think of Picasso, they'll often say Manet. But how many of us truly know the artist Charles White? Have we heard of Charles White? Have we ever interacted with his artwork before? And I bring this up just to say that Charles White was truly a pivotal figure in the 60s and 70s. And it's kind of just now in recent years receiving his sort of due. And this is something that the galleries, we are very well aware of, right? How many times do Black artists put out such great technical work? How many times are they sort of speaking to the contemporary moment during their own life and also during our contemporary moment now? But thinking about, well, how often are these artists also recognized for what they are doing? And so thinking about Charles White and exposing students to his artwork, that, hey, this is somebody who we should really get to know, Charles White and his legacy and the movements that he was a part of and how his artwork, even as it spoke to times in the 60s and 70s, he is still speaking to us today. And so I love this image in particular because we see students learning in the space. And so to keep emphasizing that, right, the Art Galleries of Black Studies, not as a very passive space, but as a space of learning, as a space of research, as a space of experimenting with the creative expression of the Black diaspora. And this huge collection that we have in thinking about the Black diaspora, thinking about somebody like the modern American artist, Charles White, who we also see a page dedicated to him here on the screen in our most recent publication published last year in 2020. Time is moving very quickly. I keep wanting to say, oh yeah, this year, 2020, no, it's 2021. I'm getting into it, right? It's the new year. But also thinking about artists from the Caribbean, thinking about artists who are working within Africa, thinking about artists who are working within Europe, right? Once again, we want to emphasize the fact that Black identity itself is not just centered in the United States. This is a very global narrative. This is a very global story that we're experiencing here. And as we think about this creative expression, realizing that, our collection has really kept this in mind and has grown completely. And looking at the numbers, I would say that we have about, at the moment, over 900 objects from sub-Saharan Africa. We have over then 200 contemporary artworks. And then in addition to just those number alone, we also have over 100 jointly owned pieces with other entities on UT's campus. So once again, thinking about the fact that Black Studies has really made collecting an important part of ourselves as a department, and really valuing the sort of messages and the histories and the narratives that we learn from art and material culture. And so with that, both the executive director, Dr. Cherie Smith, and our director, Lise Ragbier, came together and really looked at our collection and said, we should really monumentalize this through a publication. And so working with the University of Texas Press, last year we released Collecting Black Studies, the art of material culture at the University of Texas at Austin. And this was a huge undertaking. It's definitely a very pivotal moment for us as an entity. Once again, new kids on the block. And here we are, publishing a book about our momentous collection in 2020. And once again, when you have over 900 objects from sub-Saharan Africa, over 200 contemporary art objects, and then you have over 100 featured objects from entities across the campus, this book really is just giving us even just a sliver and just a taste of what this huge collection holds. And so both of the directors, Dr. Cherie Smith and Lise Ragbier, working together to really think about how we can make this publication really speak to audiences, and how we can take this very huge collection and make it accessible to others and give others just a feel and a sort of taste of what this huge collection holds. And so also working together with Dr. Eddie Chambers, who works in the Department of Art and Art History, we are really grateful to Dr. Chambers for these essays that he penned on these various themes that came to really sort of define the book. Thinking about themes of identity, themes of resistance, themes of transition, and how the artists throughout the collection, even though they are part of a very global diaspora, all of these artists are really connected together through these very wider, much broader and wider themes. And the publication itself features artists such as, Romare Bearden, a huge name when we think about the Harlem Renaissance. But we're also looking at local Texas artists as well, and also emphasizing the fact that, artists that we know today, perhaps somebody like Kerry James Marshall, for example. Kerry James Marshall just didn't become Kerry James Marshall, right? He is an artist from somewhere. He's a local artist. And so in publishing Collecting Black Studies, we also wanted to emphasize there's a lot of creative talent coming out of Austin and Texas in particular. And so here in the publication, in addition to featuring individual images of artworks, we also have essays about some of our artists who have a very deep and long connection to Texas. And I think that's also particularly important to mention. And so the exhibition that we currently see on view at the Christian Green Gallery, Collecting Black Studies, takes its cue from the publication and wanting to show audiences, not only the artwork on the page, but also we can look at this artwork in person, right? Like, once again, these works, these prints, these photographs, they are here as a resource. And so once again, with the exhibition split into multiple themes, for example, with a study in identity, thinking about, of course, what does identity mean for these various artists of the Black diaspora? And on the screen, we have a print by Deborah Roberts. And looking closely, you'll see these names, Rochelle, Tanisha, Larika, but you're not just seeing names. looking closely, you'll also see marks. You'll see certain names circled. You'll see certain names highlighted. And even next to some of those names, you'll see comments like, why do Black people name their kids like this, right? And so this text-based work sort of pulls you in. And I think that is what also is so important about learning from artwork. You sort of lean in and what is this? And oh, there's a sort of moment where the lesson sort of hits you. And Deborah Roberts, as an artist, is really asking us to think about these sort of assumptions, these stereotypes that we do have about Black identity. You know, thinking about that comment, why do Black people name their kids like this? Well, what is wrong with a name like this? Why shouldn't we have pride in a name like this? And so Deborah Roberts is asking us as an audience to really interrogate our own sort of stereotypes and assumptions about Black identity. We also have someone like Tammy Rubin, who's also an Austin-based artist. And her ceramics, I would say, another powerful example of asking audiences to lean in. I can't tell you how many times people have looked at Tammy Rubin's artwork and thought, oh, okay, these are really interesting. They're fun, they're dynamic. You know, you kind of want to even reach out and touch them. They're sort of tactile almost with the sort of beads and the lines. And then a sort of perhaps even eerie sense comes over you if you sort of realize, oh, these cone shapes look kind of familiar. In fact, this thing that at once sort of seemed fun is looking sort of ominous now. And as we start to realize that perhaps these sort of cone shapes look more like Ku Klux Klan hats more than anything, we also start to look deeper into the line work. And paying closer attention to the line work, you may notice the outline of states, for example. You may notice sort of county lines. And especially looking at this object, one of the blue cones on the right, you can even see, I think that's like Texas down towards the bottom of one of the cones. And so Tammy Rubin is really thinking about migration. She's thinking about transition, once again, right? A study in transition. And thinking about how Black people have often migrated throughout the country, seeking freedom, seeking liberation, but also some of the forces that have also been behind this sort of migration and reminding us that, you know, these migrations continue to this day. And what's also great about collecting Black studies is that, once again, we have these Texas-based artists, we have these local Austin-based artists, and it's wonderful to see them in the room with artists like Howarddina Pindell, for example, who is a huge name when we think about Black art. And Howarddina Pindell, an artist who is thinking about her own identity, but in very abstract terms. And looking at the artwork on the screen, we see these silhouettes in the background, but we also see these sort of splatters. We're looking at dots, and we see these images sort of floating around the screen. Perhaps we're looking at an image of Jesus, for example, in the panel on the right. And then we see, oh, okay, are those perhaps Egyptian figures on the left? And so looking at both of these prints, looking at these images that are surrounding them, and especially with this title of autobiography, we're left wondering, okay, you know, how is this artist thinking of her own identity? And sometimes there is an assumption of like, okay, well, this is what Black identity is. And if you're a Black artist, this is how you're sort of representing yourself and your Black identity. But Howarddina Pindell is very much thinking about, look, I'm thinking about me as a Black woman, and I'm thinking of my own sort of like global experience as a Black woman in this world. And with autobiography, past and present, also thinking very much about how her present identity is influenced by the past. And then finally, with this theme of resistance, thinking about how artists have played around with this idea of resistance. What does it necessarily mean? What does it mean to just resist? And once again, I think that is a very pertinent theme in this day and age. And the artist Hank Willis Thomas is very much thinking about Black identity, both past and present, thinking about the sort of spectacle of Black people in the past, thinking about the history of slavery, But also the spectacle of Black people has not just ended, right? This is a spectacle that continues to this day. And looking at this print, it seems very old. We're looking at an advertisement, and it's advertising, the selling of Black people. But when you look closer at the images, you're seeing a man playing basketball on the right. Is that Michael Jackson? And so you have to think about that compare and contrast. Why would this artist have this advertisement that speaks to, past auctions of enslaved Black peoples, but inserting images of contemporary Black people? And so once again, an artist like Hank Willis Thomas, who's definitely thinking about Black identity and how, the past is not just in the past, it is very much echoing in the present, and we always need to be aware of this. And wrapping up with everything, emphasizing once again the importance of AGBS's collection, I also want to mention the artist Adrian Armstrong, who is also being featured in the Idea Lab because he is now also a permanent part of our contemporary art collection. And to once again give props to artists who are here, right? Kerry James Marshall didn't just become Kerry James Marshall. He had to have people support him, had to have people allow him opportunities to exhibit, interpret, and speak. And so looking at Adrian Armstrong, I just look at that technique. In a world where so many people can barely write with a ballpoint pen, right? Adrian Armstrong is doing some very masterful work. And what's really inspiring about the work that we do at Black Studies is that we are paving the way, we hope, for the next generation. We want to support local artists. We want to support local curators and intellectual production. And so I want to end with this image of the artist Adrian Armstrong, but also with the curator Philip Townsend, who is a student here at UT Austin. So once again, thinking about the galleries as an opportunity to learn and to grow and to support future generations as we move forward.
Wow, Kendall, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing the story of the art galleries, sharing reflections about specific pieces from the collection. I'm reminded of how much I miss being in those spaces, but also that I need to register to visit both the Adrian Armstrong and Collecting Black Studies exhibitions, which we can all do. I believe Christina Bryant has helpfully dropped the gallery's homepage in the chat. And I also miss being in those spaces because, as Kendall said, both the Christian Green Gallery and the Idea Lab are places where instructors can take students for guided visits. And I've done that in the past, both for the March On exhibit that Kendall mentioned, as well as for an exhibition on the work of photographer Daoud Bey. I was lucky enough to work with Kendall on that visit to the Bey exhibition. I sent her my syllabus. It was a course on the Harlem Renaissance. His photographs featured Harlem in the 1970s, and then now in the early 21st century. That goes back to time passing. And for a class that consisted mostly of students from Texas and then from other parts of the US, but not from New York City, that visit to the gallery was transformational. So not only did they think about, or could they think about the Harlem Renaissance as a moment in time that had ramifications that stretch forward into today, they could see people living in Harlem of today, right? And imagine that maybe their grandparents or great-grandparents had participated in the Harlem Renaissance, had migrated with those artists and thinkers and activists who were there. So thank you again, Kendall, and I look forward to seeing both the Armstrong and Collecting Black Studies shows. So as Justin, whom I should also thank, mentioned, I am currently the director of the Warfield Center. And so what I would like to do is to talk a bit more about this relationship between the Warfield Center and the art galleries that Kendall introduced us to, and then to talk about the Warfield Center's place in Black studies at UT. So if the art galleries are the collecting arm, of Black Studies, then the Warfield Center is the programming arm. And I love that Kendall used the phrase grew out of, because when I arrived at UT Austin in the fall of 2002, that space in Jester Center where the Christian Green Gallery now exists was the Warfield Center. So we can think about this relationship as developing spatially as well as structurally and administratively. So Kendall mentioned that Dr. Cherie Smith was director of the Warfield Center at the time that she, working with other colleagues, right, conceived of the galleries, and she became the founding executive director of the art galleries. And because things at a university need sites from which to grow, right, from which to be developed, the Warfield Center was the administrative home of this project, as the Warfield Center led to what has now become the Department of African and African Diaspora Studies, which was founded in 2010, and the other unit in the Black Studies Collective, the Institute of Urban Policy and Research Analysis, which was founded in 2011. And I am proud to continue in this tradition of the Warfield Center, facilitating programming, facilitating growth, facilitating connections across campus, and the many rich treasures that we have in liberal arts and in other colleges on campus, and also to facilitate connections between campus and greater Austin, as we can see with the galleries collecting local artists like Tammy Rubin, like Deborah Roberts, right? And then drawing in school groups from AISD and other entities to come into the galleries and to think about this history, this rich history of expressive culture in the African diaspora. So I'm going to share my screen for just a moment before I continue. And I'm just gonna have us take a look at the homepage for the Warfield Center. And let me put that up. Okay. So I wanted to show the homepage because we have our feature photograph, which is a candid shot from the event that took place in the multipurpose room in the Gordon White building, which, as Kendall noted, is the home of Black and Latino studies on campus. And this is really our central space. This is where we host most of our events. We can accommodate up to 50 people with flexible seating in the space. But I wanted to show this primarily because of the stunning piece of art in the background. So this is a work by the artist Angilbert Metoyer entitled Memorial. And so I think that, one of the wonderful things about hosting events in the multipurpose room of the Gordon White building is that we are surrounded by art. And actually, if you think about the place of the multipurpose room within the Gordon White building, I was going to try to gesture with my hands. I don't think that's going to work. But on one side of the multipurpose room is the Idea Lab. So we are surrounded by art in that space. And I think that that is so rich and so important because the center's namesake, educational psychologist John Lewis Warfield, commonly known by the nickname Doc, his mission was not only to develop Black studies on campus, right, for students, staff, and faculty, but to, I was going to say facilitate, but I think the better word is to capitalize on, but not in that, utilitarian financial sense, but the natural connections between art and activism and community, right? So the Warfield Center was founded as the Center for Afro-American Studies and Research in 1969. Warfield becomes center director in 1973. And in addition to developing Black studies on campus at UT, he's also out in the Austin community. In 1975, he begins the project which would become KAZI, a non-commercial community radio station with the mission of serving Austin's African-American community. It's still on the dial today. You should take a listen to KAZI, right? So art, activism, academics, these were not separate buckets or categories for Warfield. These were all interrelated. And it was because of, that just astounding legacy that Warfield left on and off campus that the center was renamed in his honor in 2008. We celebrated our 50th anniversary in 2018, 2019. We capped that year with our second biennial Black Studies Conference, which we envisioned as an opportunity to reflect on the work that Warfield and our other predecessors had done before us, and to imagine what might come, right? So what is our purpose, and what are our purposes, I would say, moving forward. So in terms of Warfield Center programming, we've tried to maintain those connections across campus, between campus and community. Some of our signature events have been critical conversations in which we bring activists and policymakers to campus, and now in 2020, 2021 to Instagram for conversations with UT students and UT faculty. We had the pleasure of building the series around the theme of Black women in politics in fall of 2020. We featured filmmaker Shala Lynch, who directed the Shirley Chisholm documentary, Shirley Chisholm 72, Unbought and Unbossed. We worked with local activists. Virginia Cumberbatch, she was in conversation with Ashley Farmer about the legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer. In the past, we've had education activist and scholar Dave Stovall from the University of Illinois, Chicago. So we want to bring people into the Warfield Center physically or virtually, right, to talk about how the scholarship that's being created in classrooms, in offices, in labs has a reach far beyond the 40 acres. We're not working in isolation, we're working in concert with and informed by this rich history that we saw demonstrated in the artwork from the art galleries, and this dynamic community in which we are all living as we are working. We've also built out the signature event of Duets, Black Creatives in Conversation, which brings artists to campus to talk about their work. And I've had the privilege as associate director and director of making a concerted effort to bring in people from Texas, right? Because people grow up in Houston, they grow up in Lubbock, Dallas, where have you, right? The Valley. And then they go on to do remarkable things. So last fall, we had novelist and short story writer Brian Washington. We've also featured novelist, screenwriter, and I think I'm missing one of Attica's titles because she really is a Renaissance figure. Attica Locke, who hails from Houston, and whose grand uncle, whom she creates a character around in her Darren Matthews mystery series, was Irwin Perry, one of the namesakes of Perry Castaneda Library, right? So again, we want our community members to know, and especially our students, right, that this history of Black expressive culture is dynamic. There are people living who knew those historical figures that you might think are just a plaque or a building name. This is a rich and vibrant culture. And then we also, right, feature the scholarship that our faculty and students are creating. So we have a faculty book talk series in which my colleagues share their recently published works. And they not only talk about the content of that work, they talk about the process of bringing that work to fruition. So how do you move from an idea? Kendall noted, being struck by the detail of Adrian Armstrong's work. So how do you move from like that aha moment or I have to catch my breath moment to an article or a chapter or a book. That's what we hope, one of the things that we hope our faculty book talk series captures. And then I'll just note two more things before I wrap, because I really would love to be in conversation with Kendall and with those of you who have been kind enough to join us in the webinar. And so one is that we will be continuing our critical conversation series this spring with the focus on race and food justice. As I'm sure you all know, anyone who has been following the news knows, right, food justice has taken on an even greater importance as the pandemic has erupted and continued. And so I'm very honored that Derek Chubbs, who is CEO of the Central Texas Food Bank and a very, very busy person because of that responsibility, has agreed to come and be in conversation with Black Studies External Relations Director Shalia Fox about issues of race and food justice and access. And we also have the pleasure of bringing in two Texas X's who have gone out into the world, and they are now successful New York-based playwrights. Tyler English Beckwith and Azure Osborne Lee, again, to give our students a sense, and also the faculty and staff who may have worked with them, right? That what starts here, I'm just going to go ahead and quote, the phrase that we all know, it really can change the world. And so again, the Warfield Center as the programming hub of Black Studies is designed to bring people together. We may have a room full of mostly creative writing students for one event. We may have a room full of future educators, right, and education administrators for another event. We may have a mix, and that's really what is at the heart of the center and of our desire to fulfill Doc Warfield's goal of, again, bridging art and activism and academics. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. And again, I want to thank Kendall, whom I haven't seen as much as I normally would. So it's great to see you, and Justin and Molly for having us to speak today. Thanks.
The first question is could you talk about how unique is it for a liberal arts college like here at UT to have an art collection and a gallery space to exhibit in? And an addendum to that is, are there similar galleries like AGBS at other universities in the country?
I can definitely say that AGBS does carry a unique footprint. There are galleries across the nation that I can definitely think of. Spelman has a wonderful art gallery that I'm always looking to for new inspiration and shows. I can think of other universities such as Duke, which, has the Nasher, which also has a great, academic museum. But I can't specifically speak to, how unique we are in terms of like COLA and working with COLA and sort of having, this art collection come out of, this wider sort of entity. But I definitely think it's unique that so much emphasis, and as Dr. Wilkes mentioned, that so much emphasis is placed on the sort of interrelated nature of, what we do with our art collecting practices, really trying to actively involve, our art collecting practices with what are the students learning, what are the sort of conversations that need to be taking place both in the building, but that are also happening much more widely. And so there are definitely other galleries like the art galleries at Black Studies at other universities and other colleges. But I definitely think that we definitely, as a gallery, have a unique footprint at UT Austin.
If I may, I would just add that I think intimate was another word, Kendall, that you used in your presentation. And I would say that AGBS, and this is from my perspective as a layperson, I'm not a curator, right, or an art historian or an educator, but a word that I would pair with intimate is accessible. And this is, one thing that as an instructor, I'll say really like blows student minds. So not only can you go as a student, as part of a class or, on your own to visit these gallery spaces, to have your questions answered by gallery attendants who may be staff. They may also be student employees, right? So by a peer, you can engage with a peer with your questions or observations about these pieces. But in a lot of cases, you can also meet the artist. And this is not, in a large imposing space where you may have to wait for, a group of people who may seem older and more sophisticated than you are. This is in a space where you could walk up to the artist and ask a question and have that question answered. And for me, again, as an instructor, not as an art professional, I think that is one of the strengths and one of the unique qualities of AGBS.
Yeah, piggybacking off of that really quickly. Yeah, there's a certain amount of what we call threshold fear when it comes to art spaces, right? Who is sort of observing me in this space? Am I welcome in this space? And so it is really nice to have the Idea Lab and the Christian Green Gallery because they are so intimate and you are met by peers. One thing that I truly miss about our galleries are our openings, right? When you went to an AGBS opening, you saw so many people from the community, so many people from campus, and yeah, you got to meet the artists. I don't typically fangirl over celebrities, but I will never forget sort of like circling Dawood Bey at our opening exhibition. Like, when am I going to talk to Dawood Bey, right? This really pivotal figure in the legacy of Black art and photography. And it was also so wonderful to see students interact with him. Same thing for other artists who we've had. And even with Adrian Armstrong, who's in the Idea Lab, he mentioned that he worked previously with Michael Ray Charles, for example, who also has some Texas roots. And it's just amazing. And we've also shown Michael Ray Charles at the Idea Lab before. So thinking about these sort of connections that take place through our gallery spaces is really powerful.
Wonderful, thank you both. Yeah, it's I know we're all experiencing, and you both hit on this during your presentations, the impact that COVID-19 pandemic is having, right? And I think it's particularly acute for gallery spaces, right? We're not able to be in those spaces. And I wondered if you all could talk a little bit more about, how AGBS and the Warfield Center have attempted to continue to highlight and support scholars, particularly Texas scholars and creatives during this pandemic time.
So I'll go ahead and start. So I mentioned, critical conversations moving from the multi-purpose room to Instagram. And so the digital pivot has really been crucial for the Warfield Center to continue to bring our community together and to support Texas artists. And, whether they are in Houston, as Brian Washington was, or thinking about Shala Lynch, who is a Texas ex. She's based in New York, right, where she works at the Schomburg Center, as well as working on her documentary projects. So the digital landscape has been central to the maintenance of our mission, and we try to mix things up because we know that people have different levels of comfort and familiarity with different platforms. So our Instagram live series are meant to be more nimble. I think the demographic for Instagram live skews younger, perhaps, than our Zoom webinars, which attendees, much like today's event, attendees can register for. We also simulcast those to Facebook Live, and they live on our Facebook page after the day of. We're primarily using Twitter right now as an outreach tool, right? A publicity tools to drive people to our Zoom webinars and Facebook and Instagram. So again, that digital pivot has been crucial to continuing our support of community and of artists and scholars and community members.
Yeah, I definitely think that, you know, even though some of us are experiencing Zoom fatigue, Zoom is still a wonderful way for us to connect with our audiences through events. Also, as Dr. Wilkes was saying, through IG conversations where we speak with artists, faculty members, et cetera. And I think earlier someone had dropped the link to this resource in the chat, but also pivoting to our online resource titled The Narrative. And with this title of The Narrative Making, if we can't explore some of these narratives in the physical gallery spaces, we can at least have the opportunity to do so online. And so The Narrative has been a wonderful resource spearheaded by our director, Elise Ragbier, in thinking about how can we continue some of these conversations that we would normally have in the gallery online. And also reflecting, once again, this sort of diasporic global Black identity. We're thinking about narratives that are happening not only in the United States, we're also looking at what's happening in Europe, what's taking place in Nigeria, for example, right? And also valuing, once again, what's happening in Austin and how exciting it is to see all these sort of local, national, international conversations take place side by side. And so we're really happy and proud of The Narrative and its ability to sort of keep up these conversations and get conversations going as well. And I would also say that virtual tours have also been a great way to continue connecting with people. Of course, there's no getting rid of the sort of, when people kind of look at artwork and they're going down and they're going up, you can't necessarily experience that via Zoom, right? You're going to just hit the screen. But we continue hosting images, we continue to discuss images. And honestly, I found that some of these virtual tours have still really been powerful for students. They still really value coming together to think through things in their classroom through artwork, because artwork does allow them to sort of have a voice and allow them to come to these sort of much broader themes as they are as students. And then I would also say that as safely as possible, we are also still realize the power of the physical gallery spaces. And so we still are open and asking people, if you want to see these gallery spaces, we will accommodate you for a visit, because we understand that, so many people are missing physical spaces and they're missing artwork. And so in this brave new virtual world, we're definitely trying with The Narrative and virtual tours and programming to keep these conversations going, but also still valuing, our actual physical gallery spaces as well.
Thank you both. Yeah, you all done wonderful work on this front. It's a great example, I think, of just how resilient and creative our faculty and staff and students continue to be, during this pandemic. So that's great. Next question is, as the university works to recruit and retain more diverse faculty, students, and staff to the campus, how do you all feel cultural institutions like AGBS and the Warfield Center can strengthen or be part of this important effort?
So I'll take a stab at that first. So I would say, the Warfield Center institutions or units like the Warfield Center and the art galleries at Black Studies, they're indicative of the university's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, they're indicative of that commitment in terms of the robust programming that the center and the galleries have, because as we all know, this is programming that does not happen without resources. And so the university has committed those resources, and the galleries and the Warfield Center, I think, contribute to recruitment efforts because they provide a source of community and connection, regardless of a scholar or a student's major, right, or field of study or expertise. So I was actually recently contacted. I have to think. I'll speak in vague terms because this is a candidate who's actually still moving through the search process in a COLA department that is not African and African diaspora studies. Let me say that, right? And that candidate's research field is not immediately identifiable or relatable to African and African diaspora studies. Yet and still, this person reached out to me as director of the Warfield Center to ask about, the climate for faculty of African descent within the College of Liberal Arts and across the University of Texas at Austin in general. And so I think it's important, not that the scholar contacted me, but that the scholar found the Warfield Center, right, as a starting point, or as, probably not as a starting point, let me retract that, but as an important point in their collection of information about UT as a prospective employer, right? And so, I would just say in terms of resources, commitment, a site of community building, and a source of information. For those reasons, the Warfield Center and the art galleries play a very important role in the recruitment and in the retention of faculty and staff and students too.
Definitely, and building off of Dr. Wilkes' answer, definitely thinking about the galleries, our spaces, as opportunities for community building. And not only for learning about the Black diaspora, but I also think it's an opportunity for others to feel seen and to feel represented on campus, and that you can come to Jester Center and have this space, right, where you can feel seen through the artwork on display. You can go to the Gordon White building and you can feel sort of represented through the artwork on display, and just the faculty, the staff, and the students, their mission, their research, et cetera. And so I have also had similar conversations with students sometimes, because we do frequently invite K-12 students to come to the exhibitions, or I, as an educator, will go out to them, to their schools, to meet them where they are. And sometimes these students say, oh, I'm interested in marine biology, I'm interested in communications, but what is there to attract me to UT Austin? And it's powerful to say, like, hey, we have these art exhibitions. And even when they aren't necessarily interested in going into art and art history, just the fact that, hey, I can see someone like Deborah Roberts, I can see someone like Angel Baer represented on campus, it lets them know you're not just coming on campus to be a statistic, you're coming on campus to really make a difference and to be represented.
Wonderful, thanks. Last question for you both, and Kendall, this is a great kind of segue or addition to what you were just saying. One of the great themes that has come out of your presentations today is not just the impact that the art galleries at Black Studies has on the campus, but really on the community at large, and not just local here to Austin, but really across the state and beyond. I'm sure people might be wondering how they could, learn more. Christina's included some links throughout the talk, which are wonderful, and I encourage attendees to click on those. But any thoughts from where you all said on how folks could get more involved or learn more about the art galleries or the Warfield Center?
Yeah, I definitely think that keeping up with us through our newsletters, keeping up with us through our public events, we are a very innovative and creative department. Between all 4 of the units of Black Studies, we are working. And I think even Dr. Smith in the beginning of her essay for collecting Black Studies said, sometimes things at a university can move at a glacial pace, but Black Studies, we are doing the work and we are doing it very quickly. And I think that just the collection alone and its sort of growth is really a testament to that. And also, just being a very young gallery, also reach out to us, please interact with us. I love it when people sort of cold call, email me, hi, Kendall, I'm very interested in what y'all are doing at the Art Galleries of Black Studies. Can I please learn more? Can you send me images of the exhibition? And I think that is also a strength of us as a department. We are very willing to speak with people both in Texas, out of Texas, and we really want to see the growth of the department, the growth of the units. And so we understand that in doing that, it's through community building. And so definitely keep up with us online through newsletters, events, et cetera, and watch how we grow.
I'll just add, or actually I'll repeat with slight modification what Kendall has said, and then add one other observation, and that is, Yes, please subscribe to the Warfield Center newsletter. If you follow the link that Christina Bryant has helpfully provided in the chat, that'll take you to our homepage. And you can also find our social media handles. So please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And then what I wanted to add is that when we are able to gather in person again, when, not if, the Warfield Center and the Idea Lab are based in the Gordon White building at 21st Street in Whitus, or actually 24th Street. Sorry, I'm on the wrong side of campus. So not too far from San Antonio Garage. CAT Metro has major lines that stop along Guadalupe and also along Dean Keaton. And the Warfield Center will validate parking. So although we want to encourage mass transit, right, they're more ecologically responsible modes of transportation. And the Christian Green Gallery is not too far from MLK Boulevard. Brazos Garage is on that side of campus, and also MLK is another major transit corridor. So get to know us electronically. In the short term, and in the long term, we hope to see you in person as well.